give it a second here. Okay, we are live, so we just want to say hello to everybody. We are super excited to be here with two special guests. I have Deidre Garrett here with me, who's one of my colleagues at MRA and has been really leading our DEI initiatives here at MRA and has also spent a lot of time with our member companies, so she'll share a unique perspective from that, as well as Stephen Brown from Molson Coors. We're excited to have you as a guest as well. So Deidre, I'll let you first introduce yourself and share a little story about how you know Stephen Brown.
Awesome. So happy to be with you all today. I met Stephen firstly when I was in Black Achievers here at the Y in Milwaukee. And also we were just reminiscing, we have something else in common. His daughter went to Hampton University, which is one of the best schools on earth as well. So happy to have Stephen with us today. He has a lot of experience in being an HR leader, but has also recently, within the past 5 years, delved into the DEI space even deeper, just because he is a knowledgeable expert. And we're so happy to have him here today. So Stephen, if you want to just start off by telling us really what got you first initially interested in really having a role solely focused in DEI, and how did you get started on that journey?
Yeah, first of all, it's great to see you. When you talked about, us knowing each other, I'm so glad you didn't talk about the years, but just more about the place, because I appreciate that. Listen, I have been in the HR area for well over 20 years. And then my last 15 years, I was with GE Healthcare. And we had a very active ERG, particularly around African Americans. And I was an active leader there. And then the organization wanted to have a very specific focus around what we call IND at the time. And that was something I think professionally I always had an interest in, but I also felt I could help the company out. So I took a role as a global IND leader for about 3.5, 4 years. And then I joined Molson Coors last March, and a very dedicated, at that time we called it D and I, and this was passed in January, we added the E, because we thought it was really important around this equity rather. So diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we've been on this journey, man, and it's been quite a lot. And so we could talk a little bit more about what that means.
Stephen, can you talk a little bit about where you're at on your journey at Molson Coors and some of the things that are some of the initiatives you're working on, or things that other employers could maybe pick up on and learn from you and your experience?
Yeah, that's a great question, because this has been a long journey for the organization. I was kind of reminiscing. This is again, oddly enough, I've worked for this company 3 times now. And I think back to my first time working here, we had a diversity leader. And then when I left for a number of years, and when I came back, we had another diversity leader. So we've been kind of on this particular journey for quite some time. But I think, one of the things I talk about a lot is this really is a journey, it's a roadmap. And sometimes when you think about it that way, when you're on the journey, sometimes you're going fast, sometimes you're going slow, sometimes you kind of pull on the side of the road. It just becomes, so when you ask me kind of where we are, in some cases, I think we did a reset, right? And so I think we had slowed down and it wasn't even like an intentional slowdown, frankly, but it was one that we slowed down on this journey. So I think within the last 13, 14 months, we have put it in high gear for a number of reasons. We've had a tragedy that happened in this company about 14 months ago with a mass shooting that we had. We had the pandemic that followed soon after that one. Then we had this thing called the social unrest that happened in the US and beyond. So we are, and none of those things happen without having an impact in regards to having this focus. So in some cases, we've been on this journey for a long time. In other cases, we're new because the pandemic and the social unrest is extremely new to all of us. And then you add this mass shooting that we had, that we've just never seen this before.
Yeah, those are hard things to go through. How has your organization tried to overcome some of those things? And how have you tried to create an inclusive environment after unfortunately having a mass shooting at the site? Because I think that's something obviously that comes into play when you talk about environment and trying to create that space for your employees.
No, you're absolutely right. You know, this was one of the reasons that attracted me to the organization. That I just want to be part of the recovery and the healing part, because you can never overcome it. But how do you lean into doing things that embrace this as a company, as a culture? So in January of 2020, we introduced new values. And I think those new values really kind of this course of moving from most Miller Coors to this whole thing called Molson Coors. So the new values are a great way of kind of setting a foundation of who we want to be. And with DEI, that should not be an offset. It becomes part of that value. It's part of your culture. So we've really, we've done a lot of listening. We started a lot of kind of in regards to where can we improve. And a couple of things that we talk about, Deidre, that I think is extremely important, that whatever we do needs to be intentional. Whatever we need to do needs to be sustainable, and whatever we need to do needs to be accountable. So as we're listening to what our employees are saying in regards to how do we embrace the culture of equity within this organization, how you embrace this in regards to the culture piece there, we're being really intentional about being accountable, intentional, and sustainable. But again, we also know that this is a journey. So sometimes we just want things to happen right away, right? And sometimes when you do it that way, then you're just somewhat kind of checking the box. And this needs to be part of your DNA. And we're really trying to incorporate this as part of our DNA. And we're seeing that happening. So the first 6 months here, it was putting an action plan in place. Like, what did we want to make as our foundation? And then in January, we introduced our DEI roadmap for the next 3 years. So from 2021 to 2023, we put 6 commitments in place. And then we have an action plan that will support that commitment over the next 3 years. And I will tell you, the way that we got to that point, we went and we partnered with Korn Ferry, and they did a culture assessment from us wing to wing. So they looked at the behaviors we do, and then our processes, and gave us input in regards to where we can improve both the way that we work and the process that we have in place. And that drove directly then the roadmap that we put in place this past January.
Stephen, you talked about how DEI should be part of your culture and your values. Can you touch on a little bit of the importance of leadership buy-in and maybe some of the companies that are working on that leadership buy-in? Any advice to them?
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, I told you I rejoined the company in March, and the sole reason I rejoined this company for 2 reasons: the CEO, Gavin, and the CHRO, Dave. That as I'm having conversations with them, it was not that they were looking for someone to drive this initiative. They were looking for someone to aid them in putting this in place. And so ultimately, they are leading this. And the compassion, the empathy, the understanding, I saw that during the interview. And in many ways, I'm like, I'm entering this at a really tough time, but sign me up. Because I just see them leading from the front. And I actually I joke sometimes that there are some situations that you feel like you're pulling your CEO along. I'm actually trying to keep up with my CEO. Like, literally, he is leading from the front, and his leadership team is as well. And we've had this conversation that he can't be the only representative of the leadership when it comes to this space. And so this is around our senior leadership. So I think to really respond to your question very specifically, this has to be, while we are there as DEI practitioners, and but really ultimately the out front should be your senior leadership and what they're doing. We talk a lot about this thing called say, do ratio, right? And so your say, do ratio should always be 1. So what you say, you're going to end up doing that should be 1, right? And what you don't want to have is your say, do ratio be 0. So ultimately, our CEO and our Chief People Officer, Dave, they're leading the examples there. And so I'm just there to aid them, provide them support, look at how we connect this all with the organization. And ultimately, if I'm successful in my job, then I will work myself out of my job. and ultimately we have 10,000 ambassadors in this space. So we have 10,000 employees, Molson Coors Beverage Company in North America. My goal is to have all 10,000 of them replace me. And that's pretty exciting. So I may be looking for a job pretty soon too.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing, Stephen. Deidre, is there anything from that you're hearing from members that you think would be worth sharing, or anything from our own journey here at MRA?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I love the fact that you say your leaders are really leading at the front and that you are just trying to catch up, because I think that is, it's a little bit challenging in a lot of different spaces and workplaces to get leaders on board. So I love that. And I love that you say you're trying to work yourself out of a job as well, because you're really trying to embed it in your culture, or as you said, in your DNA. I think many of our members always want to learn from various organizations like yours who have been through some challenges, but also have been able to forge forward. And it sounds like you guys even pivoted a little bit along the way in your journey to make sure you reassessed, you were introspective, but really were going in the right direction. And my question to you is really how, when you guys kind of slowed down, how did you figure out which way you were going to go? Because I think there's many different directions that people can go in DEI, and sometimes people try to tackle everything at once, and I think it can be overwhelming. So how did you decide which way to go?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I first came back, like within the first couple of weeks, people asked me like, "What's your strategy?" And my very political answer was, I don't know, right? Because ultimately your strategy should be based on what you're trying to solve for. And so when you talk about kind of, pivoting, it is listening to our employees. What is the biggest miss? What is the biggest pain point? Where are the opportunities? So my strategy truly came out of what are we trying to address for? And then the other part of that is that we sometimes want to have a number of things that we want to work on, and all of a sudden we have this huge laundry list, and everything is important. And in my humble opinion, if everything's important, then nothing's important. So you really just kind of really make sure that you have about 4 to 6 areas that we want to focus on. So I think for us, it was listening to where the opportunity was, and then listening to that, and then adding that to the strategy that we want to work on. Now, listen, if you talk about our commitment, we have 4 to 6 areas. Our action plans, we have a lot of those pieces, but the action plan completely supports our commitment area. But before you start kind of putting a strategy in place, and sometimes what I've seen is strategies become something that you complete and then you shove it away. So it has to be like a living, breathing, document, body of work that you're always kind of pulse checking if this is still right, because life happens. If we were sitting here a year ago saying that we will still be in a pandemic, I think all of us would say you clearly don't get it, right? So you have to be able to put things in action and pivot appropriately. I think that's what I'm doing. So again, unfortunately, all the events that happened in 2020 for us put us on a course that we didn't think we would be in 2019. And so we listen, you pause. And by the way, you also admit that when you need to shift, don't stick to a strategy that's not working, or that is, as you're assessing, your organization, they're saying, what strategy? I mean, ultimately, I would love for every employee to know what our 6 commitment areas are and what we're doing. Like general conversation of, hey, we did our, one of the things that Deidre, that we ended up doing last year was around awareness. So I think there is a fundamental piece that people sometimes don't know this space because they're not sure how others interact, what their background might be. And so we put something in place called inclusion in action. And so on a monthly basis, we're introducing our ERGs are heading a different series to educate people about Black lives, or our Hispanic population, or our Asian population, or our LGBTQ. So every month we're having a topic, because we thought it was really important that before you have inclusion, I think you need to have awareness, right? And so we just have very, very structured way of adding this awareness. The more that you're aware, the opportunity for you to opt in to what we're doing increases. And so we've been very intentional how we're trying to make awareness part of how we act here as well.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I know that's a focus of ours here at Emory as well through our iLead employee group that Courtney and I are both very involved in. We aspire to offer regular educational webinars for our internal employee base, just to really elevate our knowledge internally about different DEI topics and matters. I like the fact that you were talking about listening so much. And I don't know if it was a listening session, but you also mentioned pulse checks. I think oftentimes it sounds great to say, yeah, we're going to host this listening thing with employees. How did the leaders kind of prepare themselves for the messaging that was coming across from employees? Or did you guys have a meeting with leaders before those listening sessions kind of took place, just so they could really soak it all in, but be able to digest the information and be able to really formulate those strategies that you talked about? Because I think doing the pulse checks along the way, you may find some new things, and some of the information may not feel as good, when you're receiving that information.
You're absolutely right. I think we thought we prepped them, to be frank with you. And then we did the listening sessions, and we had employees who had a lot of pent up frustration. And so they were vulnerable in sharing, and we just weren't prepared for what we were hearing, frankly. And so we ended up finding, and by the way, we made it okay not to even speak, but it wasn't okay to not listen, right? And so we were preferring that we have more silent than speaking. And we just got a lot from those sessions. And we literally paused our entire operation one Friday, and we just did listening session across the organization. And when we first introduced this, they're like, wait, so you want us to like not work and listen? We're like, yep, right? And frankly, it was something new for us, but ultimately it just allowed people to share. And one of the things that we found out right away, that it was okay to not be okay. It was okay that sometimes you learn more than when you listen than when you speak. And then ultimately is what you take from that experience and you bring forward. If you're just having a listening session and you didn't hear, then it wasn't worth your time or investment, right? And so we're asking to do both, listen and hear, hear and listen. So that the whole combination. And then on a quarterly basis, we now do a employee engagement. And that allows us to continue to listen to what our employees are saying that's working within your organization. A quarterly engagement survey, I know a lot of companies will do them. It feels taxing sometimes. Like, should we do this on a semi-annual basis? Should we do it on an annual basis? But again, things change so quickly. And just when you think that you are going down the right road, you find that frankly, things have paused and turned the corner and did something very different, right? And so we have a combination listening session and now our quarterly engagement surveys, and that has helped us a lot. And you will see from that experience that's directly then tied to the work that we're doing. So when we listen, and by the way, when we implement something based on what we heard, we call that out. Right. So it becomes that piece of, we're doing this because we heard you and we think it is a benefit to you and the rest of the organization. I think sometimes we think people will connect the dots. I think it's really okay to bring that all together and say we're making a difference because you're actually are invested in us doing something different.
Yeah, that follow-up is definitely essential, but it's only going to help you as an organization for Molson Coors to be able to retain your talent, but also from an attraction standpoint for attracting new talent. That's really important. And probably, as you know, many candidates nowadays, it's part of their questioning when they're going in, they're asking, what is the organization doing around DEI and engagement? Because they want to be not just satisfied with their job, but engaged in what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. So that's great.
I would add to that, not only are they asking a question, but they're assessing how authentic it is. right? So are you in this because you're expected to be in it? Are you in this because truly you know that you want to be different, right? That you want to do differently. And so I think that is a huge way there. You know, there's also, I think really prior to the social unrest happened last summer, I think companies were hesitant to be socially conscious, right? They just kind of followed and saying, you know, if I don't say anything about race, if I don't say anything about gender, if I don't say anything about, you know, hate, if I don't say anything about, you know, whatever that is, then I'm going to fly under the radar. And we don't have that. That's non-negotiable now. You truly have to be socially conscious. You have to run your business, absolutely. And I use this really powerful technical word, A&D, right? So you have to do both, run a business and be socially conscious. And your employees and the people looking at you to be future employees are seeing how well you run your business and you are socially conscious, that you care. Even when a lot of this came about, we were really careful that we express what the work needed to go, that needed to happen outside of our walls, but we said very clearly we have work to do inside. And so again, it's doing both. It's working inside of all the things our employees are asking for, and recognizing what role we can play within the communities that we live and we work in. And so we're doing both of those. And I think that has also helped as people look at us saying, this is real, right? And so the realness is how much we continue to talk about it, and you see action associated with it. But again, intentional, sustainable, and accountable is going to help companies figure out how real this is. You know, and you know, we've also said this, and I wish I could say I coined this, but I am a very big Hamilton fan. But you know, it's about the movement at the moment, right? And so we've heard that a whole lot. And so we said that last year. We can't stop saying it this year. Like, it was this thing about, you know, when 2021 came about, we can, like, you know, throw everything off and start anew. And we need to pull a lot of that through. So again, it goes back to, this has to be a movement, an ongoing movement, and not just a fleeting moment.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Stephen. And Deidre, thank you for your comments as well. I do just kind of want to wrap up with one additional question. What piece of advice do you have for HR leaders or DEI leaders or employers that are beginning their DEI journey or are even further down in their journey?
If you're starting out, be authentic and be vulnerable. If you are on the journey, keep it fresh, keep it relevant, and recognize that it is a lot of hard work. I mean, there are days that I have to figure out, you know, am I speaking on behalf of Molson Coors, or am I speaking on behalf of Stephen Brown? Because it can be emotionally draining, right? But the benefits are so rewarding. Like, when you just see things starting to change, that's when you know that the wins are worth the work.
Well, we appreciate you putting the work in. You are doing a fantastic job leading DEI at Molson Coors. And we also are happy that you'll be joining us in our breakout session for how to launch a diversity council at our DEI conference coming up in May. So thank you so much.
I'm excited about it. You know, you call me, you ask me to do something, like, okay, how quickly? When do you want me to do it? So yeah, absolutely. I'm excited about that. I don't know it all, but I am always willing to share what I know.
That's awesome. And I just actually dropped the link of our DEI conference in the comments. So if people want to register and hear more from Stephen and Deidre and many other awesome speakers that day, it'll be a great conference. I think very educational and informative. Awesome. So I want to say thank you to everyone that joined us live and those of you that'll watch this video later. And I also want to thank Deidre for her time, as well as Stephen for your time, and both of you for your efforts in the DEI area. So you guys are doing wonderful work, and it is not unnoticed.
Great. Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you both soon.